Hi, I'm attorney Bill Bronchick, host of LegalWiz.com, and in this video I'd like to explore the 7 crucial mistakes that investors often make while trying to wholesale deals and make money. Now, to define what I mean by wholesale deals, that is, you find a deal from a motivated seller and then you're going to flip it to another investor, more likely, maybe an owner-occupant, but more likely another investor. And there's basically 2 ways to do that. Well, there's actually, in my arsenal, about 50, but we're going to talk about the main 2. The main 2 are an assignment of the purchase contract or a double closing back-to-back escrow. Okay, so assuming that you're going to sign up a contract and then double close or double escrow, in that process, here are the 7 critical mistakes that you must avoid. Number 1, no agreement with the seller. Oh boy. If you just have a conversation with a seller and they've agreed to terms and price, you have to get that documented in writing, because the law says that any transfer of real estate or any contract for real estate that isn't in writing and signed by the parties is invalid or enforceable. So if you get an oral agreement with a seller, shake hands, and then introduce that deal to another investor who goes around your back, you're toast. You don't get anything. Well, Bill, wouldn't I get a finder's fee? Well, in theory, yes, but in most states, a finder's fee requires a real estate license. What doesn't require a real estate license is what's called a marketing fee. That is, if you met with the seller, got some basic info about them, and then turned that over to another person in exchange for a fee. That's different. That's selling information. But if you negotiate the deal, the terms, and then turn it over to another buyer, now what you've done is basically negotiated a finder's fee, which most states requires a real estate license. And that is important because the state real estate commissions and agencies in most states are looking out for this type of activity, and you don't want to get caught in their crosshairs. So make sure you have a written agreement with the seller. That makes you a principal. Once you are a principal in the transaction, you don't need a real estate license to sell that deal. Okay, number 2, crucial mistake is a non-assignable contract. A non-assignable contract is a contract that, as it suggests, is not assignable, meaning you sign it up and there's a prohibition in there from assigning that contract. So if you intend on assigning the contract and it says you can't assign it, then your deal is out the window. Now, you could still double close it, but the problem with that is if the seller picks the closing agent or the title company, and that title company or closing agent doesn't like double closings, then you have no options left. Actually, you do have options, but it's beyond this video, so let's keep it simple. Okay, so if you want an assignable agreement, most investors or newbie investors are under the mistaken assumption that if I write my name in the buyer line and/or assigns, that means it's assignable. No, it isn't. Well, technically it is, but it's not inconsistent with a provision that says you may not assign this without the seller's express permission. So and/or assigns doesn't negate the requirement that you get the seller's permission. So you have to go strike through any paragraph in the standard boilerplate that says you may not assign this contract without the seller's permission. The and/or assigns doesn't really mean much if there's a clause that prohibits assignment without the seller's permission. So make sure you have an assignable contract. And by the way, there are some ways around that in emergency purposes in my wholesaling course, which you'll find on LegalWiz.com. You may want to check that out if you're ever in that situation. Okay, number 3, allowing the seller to choose the closer. That's the title company, escrow company, attorney who's going to close the transaction. This is a mistake because you don't want to have to train a new closer every time you're going to do something creative, especially if you're going to do a double close. An assignment, not that big of a deal, but if you're going to do some sort of double close or some variation of using a title company at closing, you want to make sure it's one that you've dealt with, you know them, you've trained them, you can control the deal. And even if it means, if the seller wants to pick it, and usually the seller doesn't care if they're a motivated seller, but if it's listed with an agent, the agent usually wants to pick the closer because it's someone they're familiar with and they want to keep control. So it's not illegal or uncommon, for that matter, to put a clause in the purchase contract in your offer to say buyer chooses closer. If the seller or the seller's agent balks at that, you say, listen, I'll pick up the closing fee. Closing fees are typically $400 to $600 split between seller and buyer. So for a few $100, is that worth having control of the deal? Absolutely, absolutely. Or offer something crazy like a 50-inch, LED TV. People are really greedy about things like that. They're only like $400 now, by the way, at Best Buy. You can get an open box for less than that. Okay, so make sure that as the buyer, you're choosing the closer. Number 4 mistake is advertising it as a FSBO, for sale by owner. I think on Craigslist and such, public advertising. If you're going to your investor list by email, I wouldn't worry about it so much. But if you're going to post it in a public place like Craigslist, again, this is what the real estate commissions are looking out for. This is what they have in their crosshairs, is people who are advertising for sale by owner. You are not the owner. You have it under contract. You have an equitable interest in the property, but it's not really a for sale by owner. You could say, I have a deal, a wholesale deal, and investors will understand what you mean by that, and that you're either assigning or double closing that deal. That's perfectly okay, but technically this might be splitting hairs, but advertising a for sale by owner is not really accurate, okay? If you say I have a wholesale deal, that's more appropriate. Okay, number 5, crucial mistake that you want to avoid is a naked assignment agreement. What does that mean, a naked one? Naked meaning a bare one. One with no clothes on? No! Typically, and did this for years, by the way, my assignment agreement was very brief. It just said, I have a purchase contract with this seller dated this date for this property, and for $10,000, I hereby assign it to you. That's a naked assignment agreement. The problem that I've come across lately is the buyers, the investor buyers, believe it or not, are coming back and suing the middleman investor for non-disclosure of certain things, like a meth lab or a crack foundation or whatever is undisclosed. Now, you figure an investor knows it's buyer beware and you should do your own due diligence, but you never can be too careful. So you want to use a nice beefed up disclosure on the assignment that basically absolves you of any liability, and it's as is and yada, yada, yada. Okay, if you're looking for a form like that, you can find it in my wholesaling course available on legalwiz.com. Number 6, not getting express permission to show the property to other people. Now, if the seller's living there, it's very tricky because you don't want them going behind your back. You don't want them getting annoyed. You don't want them to basically blow up the deal for you and say something stupid. Now, if they're not living there, it's very easy. It's not a problem. But either way, you want it in the contract to express written permission to show the property to prospective assignees, tenants, contractors, insurance agents, etc. Okay, so you want to make sure there's no surprises there. And number 7, this is the last one, is not disclosing to the seller that you plan to flip this house or wholesale it. Now, why would you do that? Wouldn't the seller object? Wouldn't the seller say, hey, you're just going to flip this and make a profit? I'm telling you, 99% of motivated sellers could care less. They'd rather you tell them up front that, I may wholesale this to another investor for a quick profit, or I might flip this property and make a profit, or I might buy it and rent it and make a profit. The word profit is the key there, okay? Especially if you're a real estate agent approaching this deal initially as a listing and now you're switching hats, you want to be extra careful that you disclose that you intend to resell, re-rent, or whatever for a profit. And they shouldn't have an objection to that. After all, what business are you in? You're in the business of making a profit. You're an investor. If you were only doing this for for no profit, the only objection that someone would have is if their name was Bernie Sanders or something. So disclose clearly in writing that you, as a buyer, intend to resell, reassign, wholesale, etc., whatever, to another investor. That way, if someone else shows up at closing on the assignment, they're not really surprised. You got to prepare them for these potential hiccups. Okay, so those are the 7 things that you want to avoid wholesaling. Number 1 was not having a written agreement. Number 2 is making sure your contract isn't anti-assignment. Number 3, make sure, no, that's right, seller does not choose the closer. You as the buyer choose the closer. I thought I made a mistake there. I did not. Number 4, advertising it publicly as FSBO. Number 5, a naked assignment. That'll get you in trouble. And number 6, not getting the express permission of the seller to show it. And finally, number 7, not disclosing that you intend to wholesale, assign, or flip this property for a profit. I hope you avoid all 7 of these and many more pitfalls on your way to becoming a successful wholesaling investor. This is Bill Bronchick. Thanks for watching.